Above the smoldering remains of broken cities, the sky remained a fragile frontier, untouched, vast and still free. Squadron leader Major Rayhan Malik squinted through the cracked canopy of his F-16 as dawn broke across the horizon. The world below was no longer the one he had sworn to protect. Once thriving cities now echoed only with silence, streets swallowed by chaos, and runways overtaken by the infected. But up here at 30,000 feet, the last of the defenders still had a purpose. Rayhan's jet roared across the clouds, wings glinting with the golden hue of the rising sun, as static buzzed in his earpiece. Echo 9 to base. Repeat, this is Echo 9. We have visual on smoke trails near Safe Zone Delta. Any survivors? There was no response. Just the cold hiss of silence, a sound the pilots had grown used to after ground control fell weeks ago. At Bugram Airfield, what remained of it, Captain Sarah Iqbal sprinted across the cracked tarmac, headset pressed against her ear. Rayhan, this is base. That's a refugee signal. Could be survivors from the convoy that never made it to Quetta. Divert and investigate. And Rayhan, be careful. We lost contact with Hawk Team yesterday. Her voice was calm, but her eyes betrayed worry. She had lost too many already, pilots, engineers, entire squadrons. The world was falling apart, but she was determined to keep this last fragment of the Air Force operational. Their mission was no longer just about warfare, it was about protection, supply runs, evacuations, and fighting for the last sparks of humanity. Rayhan adjusted his flight path, banking left as the coordinates of the distress signal came into view. Below, black smoke spiraled into the sky from a collapsed freeway. Dozens of destroyed vehicles lay strewn like discarded toys, their frames rusted and rotting. But through the hut of his fighter jet, Rayhan spotted movement, figures waving from a makeshift barricade built atop two overturned buses. Zooming in, he confirmed it: survivors. Multiple humans, 10 plus, cornered. Sending coordinates back to base. A moment later he saw them. Shadows crawling through the forested hillside. Slow, deliberate. Not running but advancing. A swarm. The infected. They were coming. Back at the airfield, Lieutenant Yusuf typed frantically, pulling up satellite imaging. They're surrounded. We count at least 200 infected converging from the north and east. They won't last an hour. Sarah didn't hesitate. Scramble, Raven team. Get the Chinook fueled. We go now. She turned to the hangar where 3 soldiers prepped the last C-47 helicopter, the only one airworthy after the last raid. They were running out of resources, but they weren't going to stand by. Not when there were people still alive out there. Within minutes, the air thundered again. Rayhan circled above as Raven team took off. From the open rear of the helicopter, gunners manned their stations, eyes locked on the distant shapes below. Time was running out. On the ground, the survivors, mostly civilians, a few in tattered uniforms, watched the sky with a mixture of hope and disbelief. A child clutched a small radio that had been broadcasting static for days until, this morning, it buzzed with a signal. This is the last defenders. We are still fighting. As the Chinook descended behind the makeshift barricade, the sound drew the attention of the infected. Their heads snapped up in eerie unison and they began to run. Not shuffle. Run. Sarah's voice rang out over the comms. Raven team, suppressing fire. Rayhan, we need a pass. Buy us 60 seconds. Without a word, Rayhan dropped altitude, lining up his fighter. The targeting system locked in as he released 2 precision rounds. The forest behind the swarm erupted in flames. The sudden burst of light and heat momentarily scattered the horde, giving the Chinook time to touch down. Raven team hit the ground hard, rifles barking as they ushered the civilians into the belly of the aircraft. Every second mattered. The infected regrouped fast, pouring through the trees like a tidal wave of decay and rage. A young cadet from the survivor group nearly tripped, but a Raven soldier yanked her up, dragging her inside as the ramp closed. Go, 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 someone shouted. The Chinook lifted just as the first Undead reached the bus barricade, clawing and screeching at the escaping aircraft. As they rose into the air, Rayhan flew alongside them, his jet soaring in a protective arc. The civilians huddled together, many in tears, others simply stunned. A woman reached out and gripped Sarah's hand. You came, she whispered. They said no one was left. Sarah simply nodded. We're still here, she replied. And we're not giving up. High above the broken world, 2 aircraft flew side by side, the last defenders of the skies, carrying what remained of the living toward a future still uncertain, but fiercely protected. The Chinook thundered across the sky, its heavy blades slicing through the air as it made its way back toward Bagram Airfield. Inside, the rescued civilians clung to whatever they could, each bump in the sky sending a shiver of fear down their spines. The smell of smoke still clung to their clothes, and though they were alive, their eyes told another story, one of trauma, loss, and disbelief. Captain Sarah Iqbal moved through the tight space, checking each passenger, her voice steady, her presence calming. The young cadet who had nearly tripped during the rescue sat at the back, staring at the floor, her knuckles white from how tightly she clutched her weapon. "You did good," Sarah said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The girl didn't speak, only nodded. In the skies nearby, Major Rehan Malik maintained close escort. His fighter jet, once a weapon of war, had become a guardian angel for every air mission they undertook. "Base, this is Echo 9. Package secured. Returning home," he said calmly, eyes sweeping the terrain below. "Copy that," replied Lieutenant Yusuf from the airfield's command shelter. "But you've got a problem." Satellite scan just lit up, another swarm heading toward Bagram. Estimate 300 strong, moving faster than usual. 90 minutes. The airfield was not built to withstand a ground assault, not anymore. Most of its defenses had crumbled during the first wave of attacks 3 weeks earlier. Fuel was limited. Ammunition was running dangerously low. And now they had over 20 civilians to protect, many of them injured or in shock. Sarah immediately relayed the situation to her crew. "We land. We refuel. And we plan for evac. If they reach us before we take off again, we're done." As the Chinook descended, the landing strip came into view, scarred and battered, surrounded by the remnants of aircraft that would never fly again. A skeleton team of soldiers rushed forward, weapons ready. The civilians were offloaded and taken into the hangar, where temporary shelter had been set up. Mattresses on the floor, supplies stacked in crates, and the soft hum of backup generators lighting the space in a dull orange glow. Rehan landed shortly after in a separate zone. Stepping out of his jet, helmet tucked under his arm, he walked straight to the mission room where Sarah and Yusuf were already in discussion. "We can't fight 300 on the ground," Sarah said. "And we can't outrun them in a single lift. We need a decoy. Something to draw them away long enough for us to get everyone in the air." Rehan nodded grimly. "I'll fly low and hot. Get their attention. Led them towards Sector 12, there's a canyon pass that's narrow enough to bottleneck them. If I can collapse part of it with a missile strike, it'll trap most of them." Yusuf looked doubtful. "You're risking too much." But Rehan only replied, "If we don't take risks, we'll never save anyone." Preparations began immediately. Raven team began prepping the Chinook for emergency liftoff. Mechanics refueled the jet and recalibrated its targeting systems for precision bombing. In the shelter, civilians were briefed on evacuation procedures. A tense silence gripped the base. Everyone knew the cost of failure. No one voiced it. As Rehan climbed back into his cockpit, Sarah stepped up to the ladder. "Don't get fancy. Just make sure you come back." He gave her a half smile. "I always come back." The canopy shut, and within seconds his jet was airborne once again. Flying just above the treetops, Rehan soon spotted the swarm, hundreds of the infected, sprinting, stumbling, crawling with unnatural speed and hunger. They moved like water, sweeping through the land toward the airfield. Rehan flipped a switch. His external speakers blared a sharp, piercing tone, followed by the roar of his engine screaming low overhead. The infected responded immediately, their heads snapping up, their course shifting. It worked. They were following. Back at Bagram, the Chinook was loaded and spinning. Raven team had the civilians on board. Sarah watched the radar. "Come on, Rehan," she whispered. In the skies miles away, Rehan reached the canyon. The infected were right behind him, flooding into the narrow pass below. With a deep breath, he armed 2 missiles, targeting the rock formations above the pass. "For humanity," he said softly, then pressed the button. The missile struck hard. An explosion shook the air, and a massive rockslide thundered down, burying the canyon in fire, stone, and silence. Dust filled the air. The swarm trapped. Target eliminated, Rehan radioed. "Returning now." Cheers broke out across the airfield. Within minutes, both the jet and the helicopter were airborne. Sarah looked down at the airfield disappearing below, then turned to the exhausted passengers beside her. "We fly north," she said. "There's one last safe zone still broadcasting." Above the dying world, hope remained in the flight of the last defenders. The northern mountains loomed ahead, jagged like teeth against the early evening sky. Far below, the land stretched endlessly, Burnt forests, hollow cities, winding rivers now dry and littered with debris. In the cockpit of the CH-47 Chinook, Captain Sarah Iqbal squinted at the cracked navigation screen, which flickered as it attempted to lock onto a signal. Behind her, the rescued civilians and Raven team sat in silence, their exhaustion heavy in the humming cabin. They had survived one storm, but the journey was far from over. Major Rehan Malik flew parallel to the helicopter, his jet silent save for the occasional crackle of static in his earpiece. "Base was right," he radioed. "We've picked up faint pulses coming from grid 9K. Could be the northern beacon." That beacon, an automated emergency transmission, had been active for weeks. No one knew who was maintaining it or what condition the outpost was in. But for the people they were carrying, it might be their last hope. Sarah adjusted the Chinook's course. "We go in low. No assumptions. If it's a trap, we're not getting another second chance." 20 minutes later, they flew over a steep ravine, where the mountain pass narrowed between two cliffs. And there it was, an old military installation nestled among pine trees and cliffs, hidden from view unless you knew exactly where to look. A radar dish still rotated slowly, and makeshift lights blinked across a landing pad. The beacon pulsed again, short, faint, but alive. "Looks abandoned," Rehan noted. "But no movement. Should I do a sweep?" "Negative," Sarah replied. "We land. If it's a trick, we'll face it together." As the Chinook descended, dust and pine needles swirled into the air. Raven team fanned out the moment the wheels hit the ground, rifles raised, eyes sharp. The civilians remained inside, nervous, clutching bags, belongings, or nothing at all. Sarah was the first to step out. The air was colder up here. So, too still. They moved cautiously toward the compound entrance, two rusted steel doors partially ajar. Rehan landed a short distance away and jogged to join them, his sidearm drawn. The first chamber inside the base was empty, lights flickering weakly from backup generators. Then a sound, a cough. Everyone froze. From behind a shattered console, a man slowly rose, disheveled, pale but very much alive. "You made it," he said, voice hoarse. "I kept the signal going, just in case." His name was Dr. Faisal Khan, a military scientist who had refused to abandon his post after the outbreak began. 4 weeks he had survived alone, living off rations, repairing the beacon, and cataloging reports from across the northern regions. He led them deeper inside the facility, past rows of data servers, old weapon caches, and dusty surveillance monitors. "There were others," he said. "They left 2 weeks ago, trying to reach the eastern corridor. I stayed. I believed someone would come." Sarah exchanged a look with Rehan. "What kind of transmissions were you getting?" Dr. Faisal tapped on a terminal. A distorted map appeared, zones blinking red, others completely black. "Most of the country is lost. But the eastern corridor, Sector Echo 7, still broadcasts. They have a dome-based safe zone. Reinforced walls, solar power, and water purification. If your people want a future, that's where it is." Rehan frowned. "That's halfway across the country. And crawling with the infected," Faisal added. "But it's the only place still talking." Back at the landing pad, the civilians were brought into the compound. For the first time in days they felt warmth, shelter, something close to safety. But it was short-lived. Yusuf's voice suddenly came through the comms, his tone urgent. "We have a problem. Rehan, Sarah, you need to get airborne now." One of the drones picked up movement. "Something's heading toward the mountain pass. Big. Fast. How long do we have?" Rehan asked. 40 minutes. Maybe less." The room tensed. Dr. Faisal looked toward the old service tunnels that wound out from the rear of the base. "We can't defend this place," he said. "But there's a fuel tank buried under the east wing. Rig it. Lure them in. Detonate once we're airborne." Raven team immediately got to work. Charges were set. Civilians were reloaded into the Chinook. Sarah stayed back until the last one was on board. Rehan helped her up, then climbed into his jet, locking eyes with her through the canopy glass. "Don't wait," he said over the radio. "Once they enter the compound, blow it." The final moments were a blur. The infected surged through the trees, climbing the rocks like rabid animals. Sarah triggered the detonator just as the Chinook lifted. A fireball engulfed the base below, the shockwave rattling the aircraft. From the sky, they watched the last hope of the mountain outpost burn. And yet, thanks to one man's signal, a new destination had been revealed. The journey to the eastern corridor had begun. And the sky still had defenders. Ask ChatGPT. The night sky was alive with lightning. Not from a storm but from the chaos below. Burning forests stretched across the horizon like rivers of flame, ignited by panicked survivors trying to clear infected paths or simply buy themselves one more hour of life. In the cockpit of the Chinook, Captain Sarah Iqbal gritted her teeth as smoke and ash battered against the windshield. Visibility's gone. We need a new route, she barked over the comms. Rehan Malik, flying alongside her in his jet, scanned the skies ahead. Flames are jumping the ridgeline. If we keep heading southeast, we'll fly right into it. I'm diverting northeast. There's an old mining valley. Tight but clear. Sarah looked back at the civilians huddled in the cargo bay. Children slept on the laps of strangers, old men held onto photos of lost families, and even Raven Team was silent, eyes heavy but alert. We don't get another chance, she whispered. Stay with me, Rehan. With that, both aircraft banked northward, skimming just above the treetops. The fires below lit their underbellies in a haunting red glow. It wasn't just the flames that worried Sarah, it was what followed them. Fires pushed the infected like a wind, herding them into valleys, canyons, and now, toward the skies. In the rear of the Chinook, Dr. Faisal Khan hunched over a salvaged satellite transmitter, eyes flicking between blipping dots on his crude interface. I'm tracking new movement, he warned. Clusters, big ones, fast movers. They're adapting. Traveling in formation, flanking trails instead of following them. Sarah's heart sank. That's not random. That's learned behavior. They're evolving, Faisal muttered. And if they're evolving, this isn't a virus. It's something else. Just as the valley opened into a low basin, Rehan's warning crackled through the channel. Contact. 10 o'clock. Multiple targets, fast. Airborne. At first Sarah didn't believe it. Then she saw them, winged creatures, infected, mutated, or perhaps something worse. Once human, now twisted with webbed arms and jagged bone protrusions, soaring erratically through the air. Get the civilians down, she shouted, banking hard as one of the creatures slammed against the side of the Chinook, claws scraping metal. The bird-like infected howled, half screech, half growl, before another darted toward Rehan's jet. He rolled the aircraft sharply, locking on and letting off a short burst. One winged infected burst mid-air, spiraling down in flames. But more came. They weren't many, but enough to swarm. Inside the Chinook, Raven Team opened fire from the side ports, their bullets stitching the air with heat and thunder. We've got 5 incoming, yelled one of the gunners. Can't hold them long. Sarah's hands were steady as she pulled the aircraft higher, seeking altitude they'd left behind in favor of low-flying stealth. Rehan, I need a clear path. I can't outrun these things. Copy that. On it. Rehan kicked his jet into a dive, drawing the flying infected away. Like moths to a flame, the creatures turned toward the roar of his engines. He led them down through the basin, banking sharply, then pulling up and releasing a short-range flare burst. The heat-seeking response was immediate. 3 of the creatures slammed into the decoys, exploding in a flash of black ichor and smoke. With the air briefly cleared, Sarah pushed the Chinook higher, emerging above the smoke line. For a moment, the stars returned and silence settled once more. But it was temporary. Below, the ground wasn't any safer. Faisal pointed toward a crumbling city on the edge of the desert. That's Sector 12. Last known relay station before the Eastern Corridor. If anyone's listening, they'll be there. Sarah nodded and locked in the coordinates. Prep everyone. We land in 30. Rehan rejoined her formation, though his jet showed damage, black smears across one wing and sparks trailing from the underbelly. I'm good, he assured. But I won't last another encounter like that. Let's just get to the relay station, Sarah replied. We regroup there, find fuel and contact Echo 7. As they approached Sector 12, what remained of the once bustling urban zone came into view. Half-flooded streets, overgrown rooftops, crumbling towers, and remarkably faint radio signals. The landing zone would be risky. But somewhere in the heart of the ruined city, someone was still transmitting. Below the aircraft, shadows moved between buildings. Some infected. Some, possibly not. Sarah looked over her shoulder at the civilians, their eyes filled with the fragile glow of hope. They think we're saving them, Rehan said quietly over the comms. Sarah replied, we are. The defenders were about to land and fire once again. But as long as the skies were theirs, they would not stop. Ask ChatGPT. The Chinook descended slowly over the ruins of Sector 12, its blades stirring up thick clouds of ash and dust. Below, the once thriving city was nothing more than a shattered skeleton. Cracked skyscrapers loomed like ancient monuments, their glass long since broken and metal rusted with time. Abandoned vehicles littered the roads, some overturned, others still smoldering from fires long extinguished. But amid the decay, something flickered, a signal. Weak, intermittent, but definitely there. Captain Sarah Iqbal kept her eyes sharp as she guided the aircraft down into a cracked plaza surrounded by half-fallen buildings. Raven team fanned out the moment the ramp dropped, weapons drawn, scanning every shadow and broken window. Eyes on rooftops. These places look dead until they aren't, barked Sergeant Cameron, sweeping the area with a mounted light. Rayhan's fighter jet couldn't land in the narrow streets, so he banked into a high protective circle overhead, engines humming in constant motion. "I'll cover from the air," he said over comms. "If anything moves down there, I'll see it." Inside the city, the silence was unnerving. It wasn't just quiet, it was still, like even the wind had stopped to watch. The survivors remained inside the Chinook, guarded by 2 members of Raven team. Sarah, Faisal, and the rest of the squad pushed forward on foot, tracking the source of the signal. "This building," Faisal pointed toward a hollowed-out communications center, its satellite dish barely intact. The front door was blocked by rubble, so they circled around and entered through a side alley that reeked of rot and mold. The inside was dark and narrow, lit only by flickering emergency lights powered by ancient solar batteries. Old blood stained the walls, long dried to brown. Suddenly, movement. A shadow darted past the hall. Weapons went up. "Hold," Sarah commanded and slowly stepped forward. From the darkness emerged a girl, barely 16, arms raised, trembling. "Don't shoot," she whispered. "We're still here." Behind her more emerged, 4 in total. 2 adults, 1 elderly and the girl. Survivors. Starved, scared but alive. "We thought everyone forgot us," the older man croaked. "We've been maintaining the relay, hoping someone would hear it." Faisal moved quickly to the old terminal. "The signal's coming from here. We can boost it with the Chinook's antenna system and reach Echo 7. But we'll need time." Outside, Rayhan's voice came urgently through the radio. "We've got trouble. Multiple heat signatures, too large to be human. They're crawling from the sewer systems. Whatever's down there, it knows you're here. Get ready for contact," Sarah ordered. "We hold this building." Raven team reinforced the entrance. "If we lose this place, we lose the signal and we lose any chance at extraction." Cameron nodded. "We'll hold." The infected began to emerge like rats from broken storm drains, faster than before, more coordinated. Their bodies were slick with sewer water and grime, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. Sarah raised her weapon and fired the first shot. The firefight erupted like thunder in the city's heart. Raven team laid down suppressive fire from windows and broken walls. The infected, once mindless, now seemed to act with intent. They used cover. They flanked. Something, or someone, was driving them. Inside, Faisal worked furiously. Signal boosted. Transmitting emergency code to Echo 7. "Stand by." His voice shook. Outside, more infected were coming, hundreds now, swarming like ants toward the light and sound of life. From above, Rayhan made strafing runs, his jet's autocannons tearing through the advancing horde. But he was running low on ammunition, and the jet systems were strained. "I can give you one more pass, then I've got to pull back." Sarah reloaded, sweat dripping into her eyes. "Hold them as long as you can. We only need a few more minutes." Then a sound cut through the chaos, a burst of static in Faisal's headset, followed by a clear voice. "This is Echo 7 command. We received your signal. Coordinates locked. Air corridor opening. Estimated time to arrival, 15 minutes. Hold tight." 15 minutes. It might as well have been a lifetime. The building shook as an infected brute smashed through a side wall. Raven team diverted, opening fire as civilians inside screamed. Sarah threw herself between the breach and the girl, pulling her behind a console. She fired until her magazine clicked empty. Rayhan's final pass was thunderous. He dropped 2 flares, blinding the advancing wave and giving Raven team just enough cover to reinforce the breach. Smoke filled the air. Screams, gunfire, blood, but also determination. "We've held worse," Cameron growled, reloading. "We hold this." From far in the distance, engines roared. Not infected, aircraft. Echo 7's response squad. Sarah looked up through the broken ceiling, hope flashing in her eyes. "Evac's coming," she said. "Let's make sure we're still breathing when they get here." The defenders had drawn a line in the ashes of a broken city, and they weren't going to let it fall. "Not today." Asked ChatGPT. The deep hum of distant engines grew louder, cutting through the smoke-choked air like a promise. Sarah Iqbal ducked behind a shattered control panel, heart pounding, gun hot in her hands. Her ears rang with the sounds of bullets, screams, and the guttural screeches of the infected. They were everywhere now, swarming the communications center, crawling through vents, pounding on reinforced doors. The building was crumbling under the weight of desperation, and time was running out. Echo 7, this is Bagram Defense. We have eyes on your aircraft. Repeat, we have visual. Faisal's voice cracked as he screamed into the radio, hands trembling as he clung to the transmitter. Outside the window, Sarah saw it, a sleek VTOL transport ship banking hard between the ruined buildings, its engine screaming as it fought for a landing zone. A second aircraft followed close behind, guns blazing from its underbelly, cutting down a wave of infected attempting to scale the plaza walls. Move. Now. Sarah shouted, rising from cover and waving toward the Chinook, where the civilians huddled, terrified but ready. Raven team surged forward, securing a narrow corridor through the rubble-strewn plaza, spraying cover fire as the survivors sprinted toward the approaching aircraft. Major Rehan Malik soared overhead, his jet trailing smoke. He'd taken damage in the last run but stayed in the air, refusing to abandon them. I'm running on fumes, he said over comms, voice tight with exhaustion. You've got 5 minutes of air cover, then I'm out. On the ground, Sergeant Cameron and 2 others pushed debris aside, clearing a path to the new VTOL. Come on, move, he bellowed as the girl, the elderly man, and the remaining survivors dashed across the broken plaza. One of the civilians tripped, an older woman with a wrapped leg injury. Cameron didn't hesitate. He scooped her up over his shoulder and kept running. Sarah was the last to leave the building. She fired one last burst into a group of charging infected, then sprinted after her team as the horde poured in behind her, howling, clawing, breaking through the last barriers. Faisal stayed behind at the comm station, broadcasting a looped distress signal. We have survivors, he repeated into the mic. This is Sector 12 relay, there are people worth saving. Please, don't stop fighting. With that, he removed his headset, grabbed the detonator, and limped toward the stairwell, leaving the room behind. The first Echo 7 transport touched down hard, its side doors sliding open as armored soldiers inside unleashed suppressive fire from mounted turrets. Raven team hustled civilians inside, the heat from the engines blowing grit and smoke into their faces. We're at capacity, the pilot shouted. You've got one more lift, make it count. Sarah waved the remaining few forward, including Faisal, who appeared behind them, bloodied but still alive. Where's Rehan? She yelled. He's still in the air, someone shouted back. From above, Rehan's voice came through again, calm but strained. Fuel's at redline. I've got 1 shot left. I'll draw them off the LZ. Get those people out. Rehan, no. Sarah shouted into the comm, we're not leaving you behind. You'll get another chance to yell at me later, he said with a weak chuckle. Go. Seconds later, his jet dove low over the plaza. He fired the last of his flares, unleashing a blinding flash that drew the infected like moths to fire. He buzzed the rooftops, flying so close that debris rose in his wake. The infected changed direction, flooding away from the evacuation zone and chasing the roar of his engine. It worked. The path cleared just long enough. The second VTOL landed. Cameron pushed Sarah toward it. That's it. You're up. But Rehan? We all survive, Cameron said. That was the mission. Sarah climbed aboard as the last few soldiers jumped in behind her. Faisal collapsed into a seat beside her, clutching his ribs, his voice raspy. We made it. As the doors sealed and the VTOL rose into the night, Sarah turned toward the cockpit. Get us out of this city. Behind them, the plaza burned. The communications center exploded in a fireball as Faisal's charges detonated, engulfing the remaining infected in smoke and flame. And overhead, in the fading light of dusk, Rehan's jet arced away from the city, damaged but still flying. For now. In the cargo bay, silence settled, relief, exhaustion, and grief all bundled into a breath no one had dared to take for hours. Children huddled with mothers. Soldiers leaned against cold steel. Sarah stared out a small port window, her voice barely above a whisper. He stayed in the sky, to keep us alive. And now, with the last defenders finally on the move, they soared toward the only hope left on Earth, Echo 7. Ask ChatGPT. The VTOLs glided over barren lands as dawn cracked the sky with streaks of pale gold. After hours of flying in tense silence, the exhausted survivors finally saw it, Echo 7. Nestled deep within a natural canyon, the safe zone stood like a fortress from a forgotten world. Towering metal walls curved with the shape of the land, reinforced with solar arrays and wind turbines. Watchtowers gleamed under the rising sun, and sentries stood alert with weapons ready. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope didn't feel like a lie. Sarah Iqbal, standing near the cockpit of the transport, watched the approach with skeptical eyes. "It's real," she said under her breath. They weren't bluffing. Dr. Faisal, bruised and wrapped in gauze, managed a faint smile. "I didn't think we'd ever see it. But it's not over yet. This place is protected, yes, but if they let their guard down even once." "They won't," interrupted Cameron from his seat. "Not while we're here." The aircraft circled once before receiving clearance to land. As the rear hatch opened, warm morning air rushed in, dry, clean, and filled with a strange silence. Uniformed guards approached with scanners and medical gear. The survivors were ushered off the aircraft in orderly fashion, checked for infection signs, injuries, and trauma. Some cried. Some collapsed from relief. Others simply looked around in disbelief. A tall, silver-haired officer stepped forward, saluting sharply. "Commander Alim Dastur. Welcome to Echo 7. You're the first contact we've had with the outside in 24 days. Sarah stepped down from the VTOL and saluted back. "Captain Sarah Iqbal. Bagram Airfield. These civilians are all that remains of Convoy Delta and Sector 12's relay team." Commander Alim's expression darkened. "We heard their signal, and feared the worst. Major Rehan Malik wasn't with them. His jet had diverted after the last attack, barely staying in the air. Fuel gone, engines whining, he'd managed to land in the desert, sending his coordinates to Echo 7 just before systems failed. He was alive, but stranded. I want a search and rescue team in the air within 10 minutes, Sarah told Alim, pacing beside him in the command tower. He saved us. He held the skies when no one else could. We owe him everything. Alim nodded. We already launched a drone. He's about 70 clicks west, near a dried riverbed. No infected swarms in that zone for now. Meanwhile, the survivors were given shelter, food, and for the first time in days, real beds. Children giggled over soap bubbles, families reunited with others who had made it to Echo 7 earlier. Some cried at the sight of running water. Others stared blankly, still too shocked to speak. Cameron watched it all silently from the tower wall. They look human again, he whispered. Like people. Not prey. Back in the command tower, Faisal stood over a digital map, showing red zones still spreading across the globe. There's a pattern to the infection, he explained. Every cluster we encountered moved in waves, like someone or something is coordinating their advance. Alim crossed his arms. That's a theory we've been exploring too. We've seen too many incidents where the infected act like a unit, responding to noise, heat, even airborne signals. Faisal pointed at the northern zones. The key's in the mutation. The infected are evolving, faster reflexes, strategic patterns. And if we don't understand the source soon, this safe zone won't stay safe. Then we make our next stand here, Sarah said firmly. We turn this fortress into a beacon, a lab, a sanctuary, and we prepare for what's coming. An alert blared suddenly from the tower console. Unidentified heat signature, west quadrant, a guard reported. Single individual, no swarm nearby. Could be the pilot. Sarah's heart leapt. Get that team in the air. Bring him home. The rescue VTOL launched moments later, soaring across the broken land. Rehan had taken shelter beneath his disabled jet, running low on water, his pistol the only thing between him and whatever crawled nearby. When he heard the familiar engines, he stumbled into the open and fired a flare. He was aboard within minutes, weak but grinning. Captain, he rasped through the headset, remind me never to play hero again. Back at Echo 7, cheers erupted as the VTOL touched down. Sarah met him at the ramp, her face a mixture of anger and joy. Took your time. You looked like you had things under control, Rehan joked, eyes softening. For the first time in what felt like weeks, the defenders were reunited, scarred but still standing. Echo 7 had survived. But something darker was moving on the horizon. They would rest for now. But the real war was only beginning. Ask ChatGPT. The calm within Echo 7 didn't last. For 2 precious days, the survivors rested behind the reinforced walls of the last known safe zone. Children laughed again. Old men sat in the sun. Soldiers shared stories instead of strategies. It was almost enough to make them believe the worst had passed. But war never ends quietly, and the sky, their only remaining advantage, was about to fall silent. At dawn on the 3rd day, an alert blared from Echo 7's northern watchtower. A dark cloud moved across the horizon, massive, rolling, unlike any swarm they had seen. The infected weren't just charging. They were marching. Coordinated. Steady. Relentless. It's not just a horde, Commander Alim growled. It's a siege. Inside the war room, the map lit up red. Thousands of hostiles closing in. Rayhan scanned the satellite feed, his expression hard. They're not just moving together. They're forming a perimeter. They're learning. Faisal slammed his fist on the console. This confirms everything. The infected aren't following instinct anymore. There's intelligence behind their movements now. Sarah looked up from the map. Then this isn't just another wave. It's a final push. Echo 7 wasn't just a target. It was a symbol, the last military foothold in a world lost to chaos. If it fell, humanity would have nothing left to rally around. Rayhan's aircraft, still under repair, wasn't flight-ready. Most of the jets that came with Echo 7's pilots had been grounded due to lack of parts or fuel. And now, with the skies filling with smoke and electromagnetic interference, drone guidance was unreliable. Air support, the one thing that had always saved them, was slipping away. "We'll fight on the ground," Cameron said grimly. "Just like everyone else did." "No," Sarah said. "Not yet." She turned to Faisal. "You said the infected are being guided. You think it's a signal?" Faisal nodded. "It's coming from a zone north of here, an old satellite uplink station. If something or someone is manipulating them, it's happening from there. Take that out and maybe we break the hive coordination." Alim hesitated. "That's a suicide run." Sarah didn't flinch. "So is waiting here." Within an hour, a strike team was assembled. Raven team, Faisal, Cameron, and Rayhan, who refused to stay behind despite his injuries. "You'll need someone who knows how to fly, shoot, and crash a jet if it comes to that," he joked, checking his gear. The team departed in a pair of ground transports, using Echo 7's last fuel reserves. The roads were shattered and winding, littered with wreckage, abandoned gear, and frozen corpses that hadn't yet risen. Overhead, the sky flickered unnaturally, as if something above the clouds was interfering with the very air itself. As they neared the uplink station, the signals became clearer. Faisal monitored them through a field unit. "It's broadcasting in frequencies we've never mapped. Not radio. Not military. Something biological?" The uplink site loomed ahead, twisted steel dishes, satellite towers, and a bunker half buried in the rock. And all around it, the infected stood still. Hundreds of them, silent. Watching. Waiting. They didn't charge. Didn't growl. Just stood. "This is wrong," Cameron whispered. "Why aren't they attacking?" "They're protecting the source," Faisal murmured. Rayhan raised his rifle. "Then we hit it hard and fast." Raven team stormed the bunker while Rayhan and Sarah laid suppressing fire from the ridge. The moment the first explosion rocked the uplink tower, the infected moved. All at once. A wave of horror rolled toward them, sprinting, shrieking, climbing over each other with inhuman speed. Sarah yelled into the comms. "Faisal now." Inside the bunker, Faisal reached the core console. Wires pulsed with unnatural light. "This isn't tech," he breathed. "This is something else." He slammed the detonator. The core erupted in a blinding flash of blue light, followed by a low-frequency pulse that knocked the team to the ground. For a moment, the infected froze mid-charge, then collapsed. Hundreds of them. Like puppets with strings cut. The team stumbled from the ruins, coughing and bleeding, but alive. Behind them, the satellite tower burned. The siege of Echo 7 broke an hour later. Without the signal, the horde outside became erratic, splintering, turning on each other, losing focus. Echo 7's walls held. That night, for the first time since the outbreak began, no infected breached a perimeter anywhere across the region. In the command center, Faisal stood over the flickering monitors. "We disrupted it. Whatever was guiding them, it's been stopped. For now." Sarah looked out across the safe zone, quiet, peaceful, but temporary. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's just a pause." Rayhan, bruised and leaning against the doorway, added, "Then we keep flying. We stay in the sky, as long as we can. Because when the world falls silent, someone has to speak. When the earth burns, someone has to rise. And when the dead march, the last defenders take to the sky. Again. Ask ChatGPT.